Hey everybody, I'm Reggie Williams, founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads, and with me I have Jake Payne, our editor-in-chief. And together, this is our What's the Headline podcast. Sadly, and this is becoming a very, very familiar refrain in April, we're going to start this off with a celebration and a tribute of yet another hip-hop legend that we lost. That's three in 3 weeks, starting with DMX on April 9th, Black Rob on April 17th, and now we lost Shock G just a couple of days ago from Digital Underground. Real name is Greg Jacobs. A lot of people knew him as Humpty Hump. He is a person who brought the funk to hip hop. I think in a lot of ways is not really appreciated for that pioneering role. Like we've talked about it, you and I, about Eric Sermon being one of the pioneers of G-Funk. When you think about it, the Parliament and Funkadelic Zap samples that he used. But Digital Underground fused funk in a way that was just seamless for hip hop. And, Shock being a multi-instrumental playing artist, play the drums, play the keys, was a huge fan of Prince, of Funkadelic, and infused that in the music. But I know that Digital Underground was a little bit before your era of hip hop, but when did you get into their music and how did it impact you?
It's crazy that you asked that. I recently guested on a podcast for my friend Andres Tardio, who is an editor at Genius, and on the side he's doing a podcast on songs that shaped your life. And I had this vivid memory of either what was late 96 or early 97 of being at a junior high school dance. So that's how far back we go. And it was the first time I heard the Humpty Dance, which is funny in a number of levels. Like that record at a, preteen adolescent dance is funny. Also the fact that it was 96, 97, that song was not played out, but was, 6 or 7 years late. But I talked about it because I remember that moment. And this was before Shazam. This was before a lot of things. And I knew I had a cursory understanding of Tupac, but to hear that song was one of those stop you dead in your tracks moments. And out of that, out of figuring out who it was, what it was, I bought all of those albums, at the time that I was building my relationship with hip hop. But, like you said, I came a little bit later, um, and got to see Digital Underground through over its, final 10 years or so as a group. But for you, I mean, you lived it in real time, and you and I talk a lot about music, and you've always been one of the biggest advocates of DU that I know. So for you, what was your genesis like?
Man, that Sex Packets. Well, first of all, their first single was "Do What You Like," and
Mhm.
unbeknownst to me until recently, they only had a single deal, which makes sense. A lot of times, especially back then with independent labels, they would sign a single deal, and if the single sold, X amount of units specified in the contract, they would move forward with an option. Sometimes it was an EP, sometimes it was another single, and other times it was an album. So DU had a single deal contingent on the sales of their first one, and Do What You Like sold over, I think the threshold was 80,000 copies that they had in the agreement. Um, it was a cool song. It was, first of all, it was really unorthodox. It was like 8 minutes long or something like that. In a world where most songs were 3 to 4 minutes, we're still in a third verse world back then. Now it's two and done. But Do What You Like was cool. It was a hit in inner hip hop circles, and back then, this is 88 or so. Hip hop is still far from crossovers. Very much there is no underground because all hip hop is technically underground.
Mhm.
It was well received, and on the East Coast too. There was it was just when I think about a completely different era where it was just rap music. People didn't like break it up at, in terms of like, this is West Coast, this is East Coast. It was just all hip hop. Um, and so that song was cool. But when Humpty Dance came out, the second single, it was an explosion. It was monstrous. It was crossover, went all the way to number 11 on the Billboard charts, which was gigantic. only Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby had what was bigger that year for rap.
Wow.
But the thing about it is, it was at a time where commercial success often was equated with selling out. So you had, your Hammers, you had Tone Loc, you had Young MC, you had Vanilla Ice, who people kind of looked down upon because of their commercial success. But DU was never like that. They always transcended. They transcended any kind of criticism based on their popularity. They never ever sounded like they were compromising their sound. And I don't think they get enough credit for that.
That's a really good point. And this week there were things about Shock that I knew and had forgotten. I think one of the interesting things is that, like Tupac, his roots are in the East Coast. He was a New York native who kind of came of age. He was a child of divorce, and came of age in Tampa Bay, Florida, which is, I think oft forgotten, and Digital Underground's roots, sort of like Two Live Crew being this act out of LA that later finds itself in Miami. Two Live Crew had roots in Florida and then found themselves in Oakland, California. And I didn't realize this either. You mentioned Do What You Like as a Tommy Boy single, and that was very much Tommy Boy's formula of take a single as a prototype, see if it works. If it works, I mean, that's how we got De La Soul. That's why we didn't get a RZA album in 1991 or, Prince Rakeem. But they got a single deal with Macola Records, if I'm saying that right, or Macola, which is the same label that put out Two Live Crew, the same label that put out N.W.A and the Posse, the Fila Fresh crew with the D.O.C. And it's that label that in the Straight Outta Compton movie, you see Jerry Heller working at it. It's really his origins. And that's crazy. And I didn't, the person behind Digital Underground on the management tip is this guy, Antron Gregory, who I knew as a kid because I'd see his name on the back of early Tupac albums. And I didn't realize that he was the executive kind of responsible for both in the early days. And that's so interesting that, later, obviously Pac and Digital Underground, but N.W.A, that they were all kind of in the same ecosystem. I never realized that. And you're absolutely right. Like Dre gets a lot of credit for funk. But, Sons of the P, Digital Underground's, I think, second full-length album comes out a year before The Chronic, almost 2 years before. And it's just so interesting that, years later, I'll listen to a Sly Stone record or, Parliament and Funkadelic or Bootsy, whatever else. And I'll make the connection then of like going in reverse of like, wow, I know this groove because of Shock G and Digital Underground. And it's just, you're absolutely right. I think that he is the undersung hero of merging hip hop with funk.
Yeah, and also merging rap music with real instrumentation, like so samples and instrumentation, I should say. So freaks of the industry, samples Donna Summer's "Love to Love You, Baby," but he injects that keyboard into it too, making it more musical. They were really a dense musical group. I don't think they get a lot of credit for how conceptual they were too. It's the whole notion of sex packets and the theme that it played throughout the album, but then also bringing in Humpty, having a complete alter ego persona that long before Doom they had people coming in and impersonating Humpty so that he could be there while Shock was there, and perpetuating this notion that Humpty and Shock were two different people. And the goofy nose and glasses and the Groucho Marx thing going on. It was at a time where rap music, you mentioned N.W.A, Run DMC was still around, and it had taken a turn away from the days of Grandmaster Flash when it was really about, showmanship and stuff like that, and it was much more serious and straightforward. And DU re-injected that sense of, levity and showmanship into rap.
Yeah, I mean, the Humpty Hump character is fascinating to me. And I think there's a lot of people that know who Humpty Hump is, but don't know who Groucho Marx is. You know what I mean? Like that was another thing I think from my era to later see the Marx Brothers movies and go, oh, damn, like the cigar and and that really was I was reading a great interview that Keith Murphy did in 2010 for Vibe. And, Humpty talks about going to a weird store in Berkeley, California, seeing these, you know, glasses and noses, and being baffled that the nose was brown, and buying it. And it became this prop. I think your comparison to Doom is amazing. Because that's all I kept thinking about too, of like, yo, what if Doom grabs another mask? Like, hip hop as we see it and perceive it is different. And in that same interview, you know, Shock talks about how the Hump character, first and foremost, was his uncle, this guy named Tony Red, who used to step to women with these like crazy lines like that. But he said it's an amalgamation of Bootsy Collins, Rodney Dangerfield, Morris Day, and Slick Rick, with I think a little bit of that Groucho, you know, using the mask. And that's just so crazy to me that, you know, at a time when rap videos and MTV were really kind of on the same level, and a video could be a juggernaut for a group that came out of nowhere. It was lightning in a bottle. And I think in many ways, you know, we can both think of artists that are, you know, prisoners of their hits. You know, I remember talking to O.C. one time, and he told me that he's sick and tired of talking about Time's Up. Like, you know, he's made other great joints. Very true. And I think the Humpty Dance became such a breakout record for this group that crossed them over, you know, to people that weren't even buying rap records, that I think in a lot of ways Digital Underground lived in the shadow of that success. And, you know, one of the things that I've come to realize, and Shock was very open about this, I think the loss of Tupac, you know, which became his star pupil and Digital Underground's, you know, great kind of protege for a time. And then also just not being able to have the creative control that he deserved, I think tormented him a lot. And he's been very honest with the media and with speaking appearances that drugs played into it. And it's interesting too, because you mentioned George Clinton, or you look at a Sly Stone, and that issue of these creative geniuses also dealing with, you know, some substance demons, you know, or things that habits that are hard to put down. It's really interesting to me. And, you know, obviously I don't know if you've read something I haven't, but we don't know the terms of what happened with Shock this week, other than, you know, I believe it was a hotel in Tampa. But it's just very sad for me to imagine, you know, that a creative genius goes out like that.
Yeah, you know, 57 years old is not old. You know, and you know, I wasn't as familiar with the substances issues, but now that you mention it, I do recall. And you think about X, and you know how much that plagued him, and you know the allegations that it played a part in his death as well. Like and you start to think about Prince and Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston and so many of our legends that we've lost due to substances. You know, it's a real really sad thing, and you wonder if that's part of the price of fame or price of that kind of artistry, is the kind of pathos that comes with it, that needs that kind of medication to kind of soothe the pain that's underlying it. You know, so it's a really tough thing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. But you talk
No.
about, you know, him being trapped in that Humpty persona, or overshadowing things. You know, you think about Eminem and Slim Shady, and you know how that, I think that was something that weighed on him as well. And one of the things that I saw was that the label kind of pushed Shock to continue to lean into that Humpty persona because of its commercial success. And you know, I would think that for an artist like that, that's a very stifling kind of thing, and very makes it very difficult for him to like really put forth his best artistic effort. And you know, even like, you know, as much of a persona as that was, I think Shock G, the artist, was just a small part of his dimensions. You know, I saw in that same article that you mentioned, the Vibe one, that he used to, or actually a different article, he used to look at Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X speeches throughout the day before he got on stage. And, you know, that's not something that really came out in DU music. You know, being in the Bay with the Black Panthers roots, and all that did, and affiliating with Tupac, who did inject a lot of that consciousness into his music later on. It's surprising to me that given Shock's interest in that it didn't make its way out into the DU music, at least the music that I know.
Yeah, I did a lot of reading, and one of the things, Tommy Boy Records was where Digital Underground found their success. And Monica Lynch, I consider truly, the greatest A&R, and the person after her, Dante Ross. I mean, they're hand in hand to me. But Tommy Boy made stars out of artists that were very talented, but not necessarily something that it might be packageable to traditional labels like your, Republics and Mercuries and, MCA, so on and so forth. And, we've watched a lot in recent years of how Tommy Boy on one hand has this incredible catalog and introduces all of these great artists, Queen Latifah, De La, Naughty by Nature. I can go on and on and on. But there's also this struggle, this dichotomy, because once those artists catch, the label very much, I think, it figures out how to replicate that success. And Digital Underground, like you said, didn't come on the scene on the conscious tip. It was more of like a party, showmanship, funk groove, all the things that you're saying. But I think that Shock, from what I've read, wanted to take it in a direction of that, very much along the lines of what has historically been going on in Oakland, California. And the label resisted. And it's interesting to me, I read this, I read in that same article that after he had placed I Get Around with Tupac, and Tupac had kind of been shopped around Tommy Boy and nothing happened there. He ends up being, an early artist at Interscope. Shock sent I Get Around to the label, much to their chagrin, of like, yo, this is exactly the kind of thing that we want you to be doing, because at this point, it's 3 years after Humpty Dance. And Shock, said in the Vibe interview, was basically a fuck you to the label. The whole reason he showed them was because there were meetings at Tommy Boy where they allegedly said, you know what, this X-Clan Public Enemy stuff, it's kind of passe. We're going in a different direction. And you can't do that with an artist, because they know what they want to say. And I think they know what the people want to receive. And thank goodness, thank God that Digital Underground had Pac, had Saphir, had, the Loonies, and these extensions of the group to carry on that message, which I often think doesn't get stated enough. I think people make the Tupac connection. I think they attribute him to being a dancer in the group, which, Shock has corrected at times. Yes, he did dance on a couple of tours, but he was more a roadie. And even Shock had said that Tupac's association at that point as a roadie was probably beneath him as a talent. And you and I have spent a lot of time, through the website talking about, wow, at a young age, Tupac already showed himself out to be. So I love the fact that in that family tree, you have, a strong trunk in Digital Underground, but it's a shame that people didn't get a chance to focus on that music that they had, that Shock had.
Yeah, you mentioned Pac a few times. So he debuted with same song. That was his first verse that the public heard on record. And we talk about those breakout performances. You and I have talked about it with with Nas, with Main Source, and I forget who we were talking about last week. With Redman with Headbanger on EPMD. Pac was another one of those standouts where you're like, yo, who is that? Everyone knew DU from their big singles, but Pac came on. He had a very different style then too. It was much more sing-songy, happy-go-lucky. It was before the deeper, like resonant, bombastic kind of pop bellows that we later got. So it was cool to kind of see his style evolve from that too. But yeah, you know, clearly Shock believed in Pac in a way that no one else did in order to give him that first shot. And then, like you said, I think part of what is slept on with him is his production skills too. And in addition to having the affiliation with these artists, he produced them. And so producing I Get Around, which is arguably Pac's biggest hit and still a timeless production. When you hear those keyboard flourishes, you can kind of hear that Digital Underground, connection to it. And
Yeah.
it sounds obviously with Shock and Money B's verse. it sounds very much like a Digital Underground record that Pac is on, rather than the other way around to me. But you know, he flipped it differently on so many tiers, which until recently I didn't even know that he had produced. It's been one of my favorite Tupac songs. It may be my favorite Tupac song ever. Um, and it's so different from, you know, I guess it does have like some like Stevie Wonder kind of like harmonica and some samples that like that give away that Shock G influence, but it's very much in sync with the rest of the album and different from the other DU stuff that you hear. But that was an outlet I would suspect for him to kind of vicariously be able to have that conscious rap because that's one of Pac's deepest.
It's so funny that you say that. I mean, Tupac is my favorite artist, you know, and probably in all music, but certainly in hip hop. And, you know, the reason why I'm sitting here talking to you and the reason why you and I have so much history together. And I also didn't realize that that was a Shock G production. I don't know why in my head, I always thought it was Easy Mo B or, you know, somebody else. And that's so crazy because you look at the Humpty Dance, you look at that there's this level of bass and you know it's a heavy hearty song, but it's one of those records. I forget, I think it was Bastards of the Party. It was one of the documentaries on the street gangs of the Bloods, and they play it at the end, and it's just so guttural. And now it all makes sense that that would come out of Shock too. And I think that from what I've read, it meant a lot to Shock that as Tupac became this breakout superstar by the mid 90s, that he was still, you know, working with his mentor. And I think that's something that we love in hip hop, you know, when Nas goes to Large Professor for a beat or, you know, I mean, on and on and on, but they obviously had just an incredible chemistry together.
Yeah. So what was your favorite, you know, what were some of your favorite DU songs?
I love Same Song. And that was one of them. And it's so funny that you worded that really well too, because I think of the video, which on one hand is kind of a goofy video because the song was used in the movie Nothing But Trouble, which I don't even know if I've ever seen. So, but you have all of these actors in lots of makeup, but then you have the group and they're performing. It was probably one of those things where like the movie studio paid for half the video or all of it. But what's so interesting is Tupac used the moment. Doesn't he come in kind of like a throne? You know, like they walk him in and he's got a scepter and he's like he positioned himself as the shit. And it is a breakout moment because even the way they turn over the mic to him, it's like Tupac, go ahead and rock. And yet I think he only gets maybe like 10 bars, you know, but you knew his name when the record was over.
Absolutely. He made it. He seized the moment for sure, you know. Um,
So
Go ahead.
that's one. Oh, and to answer your question though, again, and this has to do with my generational thing because we've talked about the hits. And Friday I was driving around and Mr. C on Rock the Bells played We Got More, which was on the Don't Be a Menace soundtrack, which was I think a soundtrack that's as good, if not better, than the movie. But Shock did a joint with the Loonies, which has this like incredible flute sample that plays. I believe it's in the movie. It plays on a few points on the soundtrack, which is a great one. And Shock does this thing that's like it's like a snake charmer. Like it's a very, you know, seductive rhythm that he uses, and then he would do that, get that very nasal Humpty sound, and he would choose like one of my favorite lyrics ever is like I like my oatmeal lumpy, because it's not a cool rap lyric, but it's a phenomenal rap lyric because it's a non sequitur, it's mundane, but it's something you're not going to get anywhere else. And he was still 6 years later doing that. And that was after the point where I believe, you know, Shock and Digital Underground were not in the major system, but he showed that he got it like that. And so I'll give it up to that. And I was so touched to hear it on radio because it's a little bit of a deeper cut. What about you?
Yeah, you know, so two of my favorite. Well, I love the Sex Packets album, and I
Hmm.
mentioned one of my favorites, which was "Freaks of the Industry." I just think
Hmm.
that's such an underrated song. Like the groove is so amazing. It's also another 8 minute joint. Uh, he tells a really intricate story, and you know, I think that that song was really slept on. But I think two of my favorites are really deep cuts. One is Tie the Knot, which is on, this is an EP release. And, you know, it's gaggy. It starts off like, you know, them kind of screaming off key and everything, but then like it shifts into this like ill chord progression with the keys. He just had a way of like layering on like, you know, high ends of the keys with the bass, which is, you know, a huge part of that G-funk thing.
They kind of weave in, though, I don't know what it's called, but the wedding song too with that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that one is ill to me. And then you know, the body hat syndrome, which is one that's not talked about much, but I think the best DU Tupac collaboration is on that, and that's What's Up with the Love. You know, and actually, that when I think about that, is a conscious. That's much more of a conscious song. It is, you know, talking about you know, people dying, you know, Black people dying from like, you know, terrible conditions and things like that. So that's one where, and maybe that's why I gravitated towards it so much, because it is really visceral and real. So that's probably my favorite DU song. I encourage anyone who has not, you know, checked out that project to spend some time with that song at least.
you put me up on that one. The other one that I gotta say is The Way We Swing, which I loved, and that was another case where I knew that record. It's so catchy. It works, and I think on Sex Packets it comes on right after Humpty Dance. So, you know, 12-year-old, 13-year-old Jake would play that, and then it would go right into the a little, you know, a little bit more. And it's funny how you learn the song after your favorite song so well. But it was years later, listening to, you know, a Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies album, and I hear the derivative of that groove, that dun 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 dun. And yeah, I mean, but I want to ask you too. You mentioned the Prince connection, and I think, tell me if I'm wrong, because, you know, you're the biggest Prince fan I know, but a joint like Kiss You Back, I mean, talk to me about how that grabs from another area of the funk that's different from Hendrix, P-Funk, Sly Stone.
Well, I mean, "Kiss You Back" is that Knee Deep sample, you know, same as De La's, you know, Me, Myself, and I.
Self and I.
Yeah, they flipped it just a little bit differently. But you know, Shock actually worked with Prince on Love Sign, which is, when you listen to it, uh, again, sounds very much like a DU production, but sounds very aligned with Prince because, to your point, DU was rooted in Prince. And so, yeah, I mean, I hear Prince, I hear Sly Stone, I hear George Clinton, I hear all those things when I listen to DU, and so, you know, I hear it throughout. But yeah,
It's interesting, you know, one of the things I read is that collaboration with Prince came out in like 98, right? It was late 90s. And Shock had submitted that to Prince in like 93, never heard anything back. They'd never met. And when it finally appeared, it was exactly the way he sent it, which I think is just an interesting dynamic between two geniuses. You know what I mean? Like, no, I'm going to take it as you sent it to me. It just wasn't ready at that time. And Shock even said they had a chance to meet in a club in Soho. And I think it was a brief conversation, but it was one about their music together and kind of a salute between comrades.
yeah, that's amazing, man. It's really amazing. And apparently, he had solo albums out too, which I have not listened to, but I'm gonna dig in. Have you heard any of his solo material?
I did, and this is an embarrassing admission, but I've reached a point in my career after 20 years. I am convinced that I have a Shock G interview around the time I was working at All Hip Hop, which was between 2002 and 2007, but I can't find it. And the internet is a cruel, cruel place where a lot of great work doesn't exist anymore. And my cassette tapes are not with me right now; they're in storage. But I hope to find that, because I'm pretty sure that Shock and I spoke for one of his albums. And I know I edited a lot of other people's Shock G interviews. And it was interesting in doing this research. You know, I spoke a little bit about the substance stuff. What's interesting to me is Shock, you know, his two things that he was interested in and that he was using to create were acid and ecstasy. You know, which a lot of artists, especially during the 90s and 2000s, used. And one of the things that I found where other artists saw this talent kind of wallowing away in post Tupac, you know, passing away and all these other things going on, leaving the label system, and they would give him projects because he had this energy of just like, give me something to do, give me something to create. So Digital Underground put out a lot of joints on Jake Records, no relation to me. But I found out that that was run by a Steely Dan producer that was just the biggest fan of Shock. And the other thing I read is when it came to his solo albums, which you just brought up, Michael Concepcion, who's, the mastermind of We're All in the Same Gang, kind of reached out to Shock and was like, yo, Digital Underground, you've put it to bed several times and you keep reviving it. Why don't you do this? Because I know there's music in you, and let me push you in that direction, which I thought was so interesting. And I want to go back and listen to those albums. I mean, this month, I continue to hear cars driving by my place blasting DMX. I continue to listen to Black Rob. And my hope is, same as Doom, that people listen to this art. And if you're not that familiar, or you have a cursory understanding, or you loved it then, but it's been a while, go back and appreciate it, because that is the sense that I get from Gregory Jacobs, that he just wanted his music to be received. And with that, Reggie, there's one other thing I want to add. I think it's worth noting that there were people that really, rap peers that really put him on a pedestal in recent years, kind of as the group had phased out. And, one is a friend of the show, Murs, who brought him, I believe, on a tour for the End of the Beginning, the Def Jux era, and then brought him out again on Paid Dues. And I love to hear that. And I know how much that means to Murs to put his heroes on. And I recently watched an interview with Count Bass D, who has ties to Tampa, and says, his style was fathered by Shock G. He was just a few years ahead of him. And I take a lot of value in that. And, one of the things that I really enjoyed in recent years, kind of post the group, Prince Paul made this joint called Baby Elephant. I know I've sent you joints on it, and they had Bernie Worrell and different people, who's P-Funk and Talking Heads. And there's a joint on there called Plainfield that is Prince Paul and Shock G, and it's very, very melodic and fun and interesting. And I think there's a whole host of Digital Underground Shock G records that myself included haven't heard, that's out there for the enjoyment, that we didn't realize were there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't know that Count Bass D connection. It's interesting. I literally just listened to him yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Fits. But to your point, yeah, I'm gonna dig into the catalog. And one thing I've been trying to be intentional about recently is I have all this stuff digitized from CD collections and stuff like that in my iTunes, and unfortunately, with a lot of material from that era, you can't get it because, like you said, the internet is a cruel thing, but also the music business and the rights issues, which have kept De La Soul off DSPs, Another Time Before You Act, have really impacted other catalogs too. So sometimes catalog is not there at all. Sometimes it's like sporadic, but fortunately DU is there, DMX is there. So I've been really intentionally trying to listen to the versions on Spotify and Apple Music instead of my own, because the artists will get paid for that. Typically artists did not get paid once someone bought an album. It was a one and done kind of thing. You bought the recording, that was it. They'd get paid if their publishing was used on the radio, or songs were used in films or commercials or things like that. But the record, as long as you listen to it on your CD, they didn't get like repeat for that. But now that there are DSPs, artists do get paid. It's not a ton, but it's something. And I gotta imagine that like DMX's family, with the huge spike in sales he's had, is gonna get a decent check from that. I really want to be mindful of that and support these artists and their estates in my listening.
I love that point. And especially, I mean, you and I bought these albums, at different points in our lives. It's interesting, Doom's Food album on Rhymesayers slipped into the top 200 about a month ago. And now that charts are correlated to streaming, that's so interesting to me, because that was never an album that reached Billboard, and Doom wasn't kind of a Billboard artist at that point. I think later on with Danger Doom and some of the other things he did with Lex Records. And yeah, I want to see that. And again, it beckons consideration. If you do that, not only does it support the family, but it creates major music media to stop and pay homage and pay recognition. And yeah, Digital Underground deserves all the love. So word to that song you were talking about with Pac.
Yeah. So rest in peace to Shock G. Our condolences to his friends, family, and many fans amongst which we were amongst ourselves, so as we were mourning his loss, hip hop was celebrating the life of DMX yesterday at Barclays Arena. I actually drove by the arena for a bit yesterday before everything got going and saw the tons of barricades. The barricades extended, up, Atlantic and several other avenues around it. And for a long stretch, like it was very clear that they anticipated huge crowds. We saw tons of, police cars and things like that, but not to, be disruptive or anything, really just kind of keep everything orderly and organized. Um, but then watching the ceremony itself, which started, a few hours late, and Swizz actually joked about that, about how having DMX up where he is now, they got some powerful allies up there and looking out for them. And he's already like playing jokes on them, like, being like, multiple hours late for the show. But, actually, X's casket arrived on time and in grand and like true, like grand style. They had a monster truck that looked like it was probably 15 feet high in terms of where the bed sat. Bright red casket, spoked wheels. I think it was "Long Live DMX" painted on it, and really followed by a caravan that seemed to be never ending of motorcycles. Blaring his music, of course. But the procession started in Yonkers, which is about 15, 20 miles away, and made its way all the way to Barclays. But did you catch the service?
I didn't watch the service, but I paid attention to the timeline and I saw clips. I saw what you're describing, and I knew you and I had talked about it, on a text 10 days ago or so. I knew this would be a big deal, but I didn't foresee it being the event that it became. I mean, this reminded me, obviously Nipsey had a huge thing at the Staples Center after his passing, but I think the New York element and the motorcade element reminded me a lot of March of '97 with Big.
Yeah, especially through Brooklyn. The town of Yonkers had volunteered to do it outdoors at their racetrack, and I'm not sure what happened with that, why it didn't happen, but I hear there's talk of them like doing something more lasting, like a statue or maybe even a street named after DMX, which I think would be really dope. But the ceremony itself, even though it took I think it was like 3.5 hours later. It started around 7:30, and I thought it had been slated for 4 initially.
Mm.
Once it got started, it was not long. It was about an hour. Some services over the years have gone really long. I think Aretha Franklin was like 5 hours or something like that. But they kept it really, really intimate. And I know it's strange to say that in an arena like Barclays, but that's how it felt. It was, to my understanding, limited to family and friends indoors because of observing like the COVID protocols. And really, it could have been a ton of people speaking, but it was really people who were very closely connected to him, either personally or professionally. There have been some rumors about Kanye West performing, and when I'd heard that, I was skeptical. I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't know why Kanye. I know he and Swizz are cool, but like, I didn't see a strong connection between him and DMX. But the show starts, the service starts, and you see a video of DMX with his daughter on a ride, and she's scared, and he's reassuring her and saying, "Daddy's here." And then it fades to black, and after actually a prayer, his prayer, the prayer is, and it's listen to those words, because he refers to his own death and like what it would be like if he's dead, and how he would view his life and stuff like that, which is just chilling to listen to now, especially. But then you hear like the opening notes from an amazing gospel choir, and it's Kanye's Sunday service singing "Back to Life,"
Mm.
which is on their album. And every single time I hear that song, I get chills. Like I think the first time I saw it was on James Corden. He had them on the plane, and he's talking to somebody, and he sees Kanye sitting in coach, which would never happen, but he says something, and then all of a sudden the entire plane erupts because it's the choir singing, and they're interspersed with passengers. It's just a magical moment. And I thought that it was the visuals and the entire experience that really impacted me. But man, just his choir is so amazing, and the arrangement to that song is so amazing. The way they flip the words, and um, but then they transitioned into "Keep on Moving," and they also changed the words to that to make it a gospel rendition. And throughout, they were basically the choir for what was a true memorial service. And they did Ultra Light Beam. They did Whitney singing "Jesus Loves Me" and back that up. The vocals. It was truly amazing. And Kanye conducting. I can't remember if he said anything, but if he did, it was minimal. He was really just there to provide the music. It was respectful, it was tasteful, and it was really, really powerful. So I think that it's things that like that that remind people of why Kanye West is the compelling figure that he is. I know that he's overshadowed a lot now by the controversy. What he's saying. Outside of the studio, and his family, and divorce and all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, the reason why people pay attention to Kanye West the way they do is because he is a supremely talented individual when it comes to music, and he showed it yesterday in a way that can't be disputed.
That's really dope. And I know that they worked together in the mid 2000s, a Grand Champ maybe, or the Year of the Dog again. And Kanye was somebody that Swizz had continued to allude to on, as I think you said, with X. So I'm sure there was a personal bond there. And I love hearing that because Kanye knows how to make a moment feel epic without compromising its heart and soul. And it sounds from what you're saying that that was very much the case this weekend.
Yeah, and in terms of the speeches, again, they kept it really to close family and friends. So it started off, ex's ex-wives came out, his ex-wife, I should say, and his fiance. Really just seeing the unity amongst them is pretty powerful. I don't know what it's like behind the scenes, but they showed a united front in front of the camera, which has been tremendous. And it talked about like his impact on the world and how he went through a lot, but he did it all for the people who listen to his music. And then they had his 15 children on stage, and that's something that in an interview, I think it was Dean um, had said that X had, I think he had never ever had all of his kids together at the same time, and they had collected at the hospital, with the hopes of obviously a different outcome, but all the kids were there. But seeing them all on stage together was very powerful with their moms, and quite a few of them spoke. Some of them even rapped, but really paid tribute to their father. So that was powerful. Then Nas came out and spoke, and Nas is always very concise with his words, but he talked about the impact they had when making Belly, and how you know DMX had not had his first album come out before he was starring in that role, and but Nas said there was something about him where you knew he was going to be a star, and X had this moment where he realized that his whole life was about to change after this. And Nas just talked about just knowing him in that moment and then seeing it actually happen. It was very, very, very powerful to see, you know, um, the evolution of kind of these two superstars and how they're aligned. And then you had Rough Riders come out, and Jadakiss and Styles let it off. Styles had this story about, and I never really knew the reference to D Block was, but he had said that when he was in jail in New York, he was in D Block, and he and DMX were in at the same time, and X was in A Block, and supposedly those blocks are never meant to like kind of interact, but somehow X made his way over to D Block. Because he was always able to, make magic happen, and
Yeah.
he and Styles connected on the music thing. and he invited, Styles to come back with him. And it turns out that actually assembled like a band of musicians in jail, and they started like rapping together there. So pretty amazing. You and I talked about him meeting K Solo there, but he and Styles, were there too. So just great to hear stories like that. Dragon and Eve spoke. Eve talked about like just the impact that he had on her, and how he was one of the most important like figures in her life, from a professional standpoint. And then Swizz came on, man, and Swizz was powerful. He didn't give a long testimony or eulogy. I know that there's in the private service, the family service that's happening. Maybe he will speak there and speak more extensively. But what really struck me was just how real his talk was about loyalty and truthfully lack thereof. He mentioned that there were a lot of people who were coming out of the woodwork now that X was dead, who were not there to support him when he was here, and that this whole experience had taught him a lot, and how he needs to move differently because he understands that like there are lots of people out there who don't really care about you, and you got to rid yourself of those people. That was really very powerful. And then he talked about the need for us to have wills. And I guess, we talked about Prince and others who have passed away. He didn't have a will. It's amazing to me that these artists who have such like, huge legacies and assets and things, and have all these people around them that they're paying, right? They're paying lawyers to manage their business affairs on the professional side with their music. They're paying business managers to manage their money. They're paying managers to manage their careers and arguably their lives. Like it's really disgraceful when you think about it, that these people around these people that are getting paid so much money are not setting up their estates and to make sure that if and when they transition, and everyone will, that their families are taken care of, that their last will is honored, and eliminate all the bickering and back and forth and people coming in and trying to like do shady underhanded things and deprive
Conniving, yeah.
children and stuff like that. It's truly disgraceful that these people who are being paid to do things aren't providing that kind of service, because artists are artists, man. They're not true. Typically they're not business minded people. They're not like people who are super buttoned up in terms of paperwork and stuff like that. They're on this earth to create, but there are tons of people making money around them who are organized, and I think they should be held accountable. But so Swiss was very, very raw in his words, and I thought that was, man, for him to say what he said publicly like that must mean that there's so much nonsense going on, and he pledged that no matter what, that he was going to handle these affairs, make sure that everything was straight with the estate, and that his family was taken care of. So it was a powerful moment, and but aside from that, that was really pretty much it, man.
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing that. I think Swizz is somebody who, in recent years, I think of Killer Mike and David Banner, and there's a host of people that their thoughts and words have my attention as much as their music. And Swizz falls into that, especially over the last 5 years. And we've covered a lot of his things on AFH. And to know that so many people are tuned in because this is an event, and to use that moment without being, without it being a tangent, but to remind people, whether you got $5 or $5 million, to have a will. And also, I think you and I have spoken about it before, but I think to use that opportunity to remind folks, don't be clout chasers with the deceased. And Jay-Z has devoted several lyrics recently to that. Like, I don't want to end up being a caption, on your page of how we used to be cool. And I think that in our community, in the hip hop community, we need to hear that right now, because there's a lot of things I've seen in a really tragic month of people that are inserting themselves into the narrative. And I'm really glad to see Swizz from a top level remind folks that that is not the way, and that's not really what the purpose of any of this is.
Yeah, not at all, man, not at all. So I thought it was a really great send off. They stayed true to the notion of it being a celebration of his life. This was not a sad affair. one of his children, did cry, which, is totally understandable. But, people kept it positive and upbeat and really just celebrated his life and legacy, which was phenomenal. We're recording this, before the funeral, which is later on today. I suspect that'll have a different tone. But, I thought this was a great send off for X.
Word. So, later today is also the Oscar Awards, if I'm not mistaken. And you texted me before some of the events that we've talked about of the last week. And we discussed it briefly a few episodes ago, but you had the opportunity to watch Two Distant Strangers, which is the film starring Joey Badass, produced by Puff and some others. And you said it really, it compelled you. Can you talk a little bit more about this film?
Yeah, it's a short film, 30 minutes. It's nominated for Best Short Film this year in the Oscars. And like I said, stars Joey Badass. I would say it's one of the best films I saw from 2020. It was unbelievably powerful. And, I'll say this because, it becomes clear within the first like 2 or 3 minutes of what the film's about. Joey Badass is seemingly like I think a young professional. He wakes up in bed with a woman that he had met the night before, and they obviously connected and hooked up. And he's saying his goodbyes to her. He goes down and he runs into a white cop who has a thing for him, and it escalates quickly, and the cop kills him. And then he wakes up back in bed with the girl, and so it's basically like Groundhog Day. And Vic Mensa's like "Down on Your Luck" video. I don't know if you remember that, where
Yeah.
he continues to wake up in this scenario, and he's trying to figure out a way to escape the day and get back to his dog, which is the main thing, without this cop killing him. And so obviously it is extremely relevant to what has been going on for the last several decades, but like magnified over the last 8 to 10 years. Especially in a week where Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder of George Floyd. It resonated, and there's two other killings like within that trial period, like including on the same day just after the verdict. Just it's insane, but so extremely powerful, and seeing just how inevitable it seems, and that there's nothing that you can do to bridge the gap between young black men who, well, just black people, period, being killed by police officers. It's extremely powerful commentary, extremely well done. Joey shows himself to be, I think, one of the best actors of his generation, certainly as an artist and arguably, period. I think that this guy has supreme talent, and we're just now starting to scratch the surface of what we're going to get from Joey Badass. It's funny because our good friend, the guy who introduced us, I won't name check him, but the guy who introduced us, he and I back in the day, I'd say this is like 2013 or so, were working on a script for an aspiring rapper. It was about the life and times of an aspiring rapper, and really kind of giving a behind the scenes look at what that trajectory is. And at the time, I had just interviewed Joey in Pro Era. He was a kid. He was like 13 years old or so, had not gone through puberty. Um, but there was something about him. I was like, yo, we should think about Joey Badass as the star for this, because it was him, like it was. I won't say the role was patterned after him, but he was definitely in that stage of his career.
Mm-hmm.
There was just something about him that made me think he could pull it off. And then fast forward a few years later, he's cast in Mr. Robot, has a breakout, performance, scene stealing like almost every episode, became a real fan favorite in that show. Did you watch that show, by the way?
I didn't, but it's on my list.
Yeah, great show, and Joey is a highlight of the show, and really showed his chops, man. He plays a prisoner who's helping the main character with some stuff, and You're really, really shown in that film. But to see him now in a role that is very different from his rap persona, he's wearing glasses, you know, very, very, young professional type. It's amazing, and then to see like his interaction with the cop and the struggles, and the pain on his face. It's an amazing feat. So I think the Joey Badass is arguably at least as good of an actor as he is a rapper, and that's an incredibly high bar from me because
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Joey as an artist. But I think his potential is equally as high as an actor, and maybe even higher. But it makes me wonder, like, who are some of the best like actor rappers that are out there?
I mean, I'm in West Philly right now, so we got to start with, Will Smith definitely is on the list. I would say, people have their thoughts. I've been a big fan of Ice Cube as an actor, and I think at this point he showed a lot of range in his roles too. What are some of the others?
Okay, I would say we mentioned one earlier, Tupac. I would say Pac, and you alluded to it with that early interview from high school. He went to the Baltimore Performing School of Arts with Jada Pinkett. And yeah, I think he was an incredible actor. In a lot of ways, the Tupac that became, the thug life guy, the bald guy, the death row guy. A lot of people say arose from Bishop.
Mm.
That wasn't his persona before, but the Bishop character in Juice um, garnered so much attention for him that, in some ways he may have adopted that persona the way that Shaq adopted the Humpty persona. So Tupac, I think, was one. Mos Def, we had T Dot on, a few weeks ago, and he was talking about seeing Mos Def on television, and I think it was on the Cosby Show. And
Cosby Mysteries, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he was obviously in Monsters Ball, and some other things. He was a great actor, and I thought he was going to continue on that path too. I'd say Lauryn Hill. A lot of people. So uh, I'll tell you this, and I'm going to regret it. I'm going
Okay.
to regret it. I know that I'm going to regret it, but you can't give me shade because it was due to my grandmother, who I love very much. I lived to the age of 95. Well, she used to watch soap operas.
Okay.
And so, after school, I would have to go to my grandparents and wait for my mom to finish working. And so I started watching the soaps with her because there was nothing else on. It wasn't an iPad times or anything like that. And so As the World Turns, I watched for 20 years.
Was Lauren? I didn't even realize Lauren was on there.
Lauryn Hill was on As the World Turns. She played a little girl named Kira.
Okay.
And she was fantastic. That was my introduction to Lauryn Hill. That was way before Food.
Mine was Sister Act 2, which was still before Blunted on Reality.
Yeah. She was Sister Act 2. And she sang in that, was great, phenomenal. But she was a great actress, man. Like I thought she could have done it for a long time too. And then the obvious one, people don't even think about this guy as an actor anymore, but that's how he started, which is really ironic. But it's Drake, and
I think I'm gonna make more fun of you about that than the soap operas. You a big Degrassi fan?
You don't think Drake is a good actor?
You know what? I've seen Drake mostly play himself. I never got into Degrassi, so I can't really speak on it. But
you watched ESPYs though that year? Remember the ESPYs? All those shorts that he did with the athletes? We covered them extensively.
That's true. Yeah, I do remember that. I don't know if Drake's merits, to me, and I'm not being a hater, are worthy of the company we're describing, though.
You are being a hater. State Farm commercials? Like, come on, man.
Man, as a guy named Jake, those State Farm commercials are the bane of my existence.
That's funny.
Oh, I thought I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore now that Jake from State Farm is black, and but nah, man, it's gotten to the point now where if I tell somebody my name, I go by Jacob.
That's funny. So anybody I'm missing any other double threats you can think of?
I mean, I think Ice-T kind of went full on Law and Order over the last 20, but I thought that Ice has showed a lot of promise as an actor. I mean, there's other
LL?
people.
Did you put LL in there?
Yeah, I mean, LL's different because I think his roles were, lighter, but I always thought that he was very believable. And I think,
No, he's got NCIS now. He's been on NCIS for years.
yeah, and I mean, I was gonna say, like, I grew up watching, what was it called? All in the House or whatever. He had
In
that
the
like
house. In the
in
house.
the house,
Yeah.
yeah. And it got to the point too where I think Heavy D was on his way. I mean, with what he had going on too. But I'm really interested to watch this Joey film. I mean, let's not forget, short films are not necessarily lucrative. I mean, that might change in the streaming era. And that was the other question I wanted to ask you is where did you watch it?
Yeah, it's on Netflix now, which is what
Okay.
opened it up. We had both like seen, like you said, the coverage about it when it was nominated, but neither one of us had seen it at that point. But yeah, it's on Netflix now, and I think it was trending at #1
Oh wow.
a couple days ago. So Joey is about to have major shine from this, especially, and I think that it has a good shot at winning the Oscar tonight. And so, but yeah, after this, he's going to be a household name as an actor. That's
That
my prediction.
that would be great to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So out of that list, who would you say, including Joey, is the best double threat actor rapper?
Hmm.
And I don't mean in terms of commercial success. I mean in
Yeah.
terms of like
Actual acting chops.
artistic merit on both sides.
That's a really good question. I think of that list, and I'm not sure you said her name, but the two that I lean on are Will Smith and Queen Latifah. And I think, both of them are easy to forget their musical chops. I think, you had to be there, really, do the knowledge to know. But I think as actors, both are top ranked to me, and have showed their range more and more with time. And I think the proof is in the pudding on the music tip. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it would probably be either Pac or Mos Def. Because Mos Def, man, like you look at Monsters Ball, and the character he plays in that is nothing uh, like Yasiin Bey, the person that we know,
Mhm.
the artist, and he is at the top of his game in terms of rapping. There are not too many people who can compete. So I'll look at it like that, and then with Pac, same thing, man. Like Bishop was, if you look at that high school interview, Bishop was very, very different from who Tupac
Yeah.
actually was prior to that. And
What
and it,
was
and it manifested even in the rap too, right? Like his rap was, and same song was much more aligned with that Baltimore like high school kid
yeah.
than like the dude on All Eyes on Me. So
And for as much as people love Juice and Bishop, I mean, for me, I've always been an above the rim guy. And I know that those characters, that menacing, and by 94, Pac art was imitating life a little bit. And I know that, Birdie and Bishop, it's not always the happiest ending, but I feel like he leaned into that role more. And even though he's the villain, I've always just loved that performance so much, in Above
yeah,
the Rim,
yeah.
you know.
But that being said, give it 5 or 10 years, depending on how things shake out. I think if we had this conversation again, Joey might be the #1 contender. Like that, this film put him on that echelon for me.
At a time when his rap career is still very much going up. And there's other peers of Joey's that are dabbling in double threats. And I don't necessarily, it doesn't do us good to say their names, but that aren't necessarily in that position. So Joey's blowing up in two different mediums, which I think is really impressive.
Yeah. So,
So, oh
so
wait.
other things. Go
Oh
ahead.
yeah. No, I mean, as we moved into other things, you mentioned Mos Def,
Yeah.
Yasiin Bey, and I was really shocked this week because he is, by all intents and purposes, a recluse. Um, Even Talib on his podcast has spoken about that. But apparently, Dave Chappelle, who isn't somebody he's been doing a lot of press and things like that, but not a lot of front facing media. In that way anymore. I mean, more But him, Yasiin Bey, and Talib Kweli have launched a podcast called Midnight Miracle.
Wow, that's dope. What's the focus of it?
That part, I think a lot of it is kind of to be determined. But I think with those three names alone, you've got my attention, especially you know, and you and I have covered both, you know, we've covered all three extensively. Yasiin Bey rarely speaks. He did that incredible interview on Ebro in the Morning with Hot 97 a few years ago, where he explained, you know, kind of his relationship with music. And I thought that was one of the better interviews of the last 5 years. And Dave Chappelle, anytime he speaks, I want to listen. And we've spoken a lot about different episodes on this platform, but Kweli's, you know, People's Party, I think Kweli in particular is one of the most, you know, prepared and researched people who asks a lot of the questions that I, as a hip hop fan and as a fan of comedy and film and stuff, want to know. So the idea of these three guys together, that alone, just you know, like they say, take my money.
Yeah, it says that it was recorded during his 2020 summer camp, and that it'll feature conversations punctuated with sketches, impersonations, archival audio clips, and a musical soundtrack and guest interviews. Which, you know, sounds very different than any podcast that I've seen. It sounds like an amalgamation of podcasts, but that would be incredible. And obviously, these guys have a history together with, you know, Chappelle's show and, you know, Chappelle's Block Party and things like that. So there's a real connection there. You know,
Yeah.
Dave is a fan of theirs, and, you know, I'm sure vice versa. And, you know, they have hung out extensively and all that. So these should be really cool conversations.
Yeah, and I saw that 2020 part, and I mean, you know, from all that I can tell from what social media says, you know, there's still things going on in Yellow Springs, Ohio. Chappelle is still bringing out artists that he admires, creatives that he admires to do things there, kind of create those socially distanced concerts. So if this takes and it works, there may be more of it. But yeah, I mean, you don't see Yasiin's name in the mix too much right now, and I love to see, you know, Dave go back with these two guys. Yeah, I'm here for it, man.
Yeah, you know, and obviously Kweli's got the People's Party, which is, you know, one of our favorite podcasts. We had a great conversation with DMX, which we talked about, and recently with Big Daddy Kane. So he's taken over kind of that drink. He's moved into that drink champ space of like celebrating legends while they're here, but obviously in a very different kind of context and very different approach to it. You know, so I always find that great. You know, it says that they edited over. It says that Chappelle says making a podcast isn't the obvious next move for me, but it's the right one. The Midnight Miracle gives you a look into how me and my friends process the world around us. And I think it will change the way listeners think of what a podcast can be.
Mm.
So, I mean, Dave always like pushing the envelope and changing things and playing by his own rules. I think this is going to be special.
Yeah, I feel that too. And on the podcast tip, you know, obviously we are a podcast, so it takes something special to shout it out. But you know, I want to definitely just take 1 second to give Open Mike Eagle a shout out for his What Had Happened pod. Season 1, he went with Prince Paul, and every episode was devoted to a period of time or a specific album that Paul had produced, including his own, De La Soul, Stetsasonic, Grave Diggers. And now season 2 is with LP, and it's still unfolding. Every Wednesday, new episodes release. But for me, you know, you talked about De La. A lot of the recent ones have been on Company Flow and Def Jux. The group and the label, a lot of that material is not on the traditional DSPs. And for me, while I was late to the party for Digital Underground, being a little bit younger, I lived through Def Jux. And that was very influential to me as a teenager and early 20 something. So I've been really enjoying it. And Open Mike is become one of my favorite artists. In recent years, I just really relate to a lot of what he says. And I feel like he's an extension of that underground, but his questions with L have been phenomenal. And just two gems, if I can offer a teaser to anyone. LP says that, you know, Def Jux, as it gained profile, got a cease and desist from Def Jam because the names sound alike. And Def Jam wanted to, in their original cease and desist, said, we will take the name of the label and release records under it, which is just a crazy thought when you think of like 2002 DMX, Jay-Z era Def Jam also having this underground label, but clearly they wanted to compete with the Ruckuses and the Def Jokes. So that was wild. And then the other thing is, everyone associates LP with Fort Greene, Brooklyn, but he talks a lot about growing up in Tribeca, where his mother owned a loft that she turned into a flop house, which would end up being part of the genesis of Company Flow. And L says that at a very young age, when I think it was 94 World Trade Center bombing happened, he walked out and interviewed people covered in soot and being wrapped in blankets, leaving the trade centers. Just as, I don't know if he was a teenager or whatever, but as a young guy documenting what was going on in his neighborhood, and some of that footage, and I think L says he never told anyone this before, some of that footage appears as background audio in Company Flow records, which is just really, really wild on so many levels. So every Wednesday I've been tuning in and just kind of reliving a part of my life that I feel close to.
Yeah, I mean, that's unreal about that footage. You and Amanda Mester, who is extended AFH family, have been a critical part of our success over the years with her pen game under the name Bonita and her Govey also. But you two put me up on an open mic as an artist a few years ago. Really enjoyed him, a very different, kind of artist. Always kept it real, but about his existence. I think he had the video, didn't he, with Vince Staples, where they're basically like making fun of like the stereotypes of people who are like out there like pretending like they're gangsters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He's got great concepts like that. But you put me onto this podcast also, and I caught my first episode last weekend actually with it was the Prince Paul where they were talking about Balloon Mind State, De La Soul's Balloon Mind State, and just a fantastic interview. You could tell the rapport that he and Paul had. He got great stories out of Paul. There's a comfort level there that leads to great storytelling. And I'm excited for him. Always great to have these different reflections of and perspectives of hip hop out there. Like, I'm here for all of it.
Word.
So something else cool that happened, I think this actually dropped right after the verses, was Snoop released his Look Around video. And there's another artist, you and I covered it. I looked for it, but I couldn't find it. You and I covered this. Another artist did this a few years ago. You remember a video?
Yeah, I thought it was classified, out of Nova Scotia, but it's not. And I'm trying to think who it is because it was a dope concept.
Yeah.
Oh, was it was Reef, The Lost Cause, maybe?
Reef, The Lost Cause. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Right. Reef, The Lost Cause. And made this video where he put himself into classic rap albums, rap covers, and then like kind of recreated it in video format. And then so Snoop did that and took it to a whole different level where he would put himself on the cover of classic rap albums, and then it would turn into live action. And he would continue rapping as that character dressed in that costume. And so some of the looks that he had were LL Cool J's Radio, in the back of the cover. He had King T's Act a Fool. He had Eric B. and Rakim's Paid in Full, Ice-T's Power, BDP. He was KRS-One and By All Means Necessary when he's, got the gun looking outside the window. He was Big Daddy Kane and Long Live the Kane, Easy Does It, and Too Short, Life is Too Short. And then he did another Q, America's Most Wanted. And he even and Death Certificate, and he did Doggy Style too. But it was a real cool concept, paying homage to classic albums that obviously he loved, and opening up to a whole different generation. But did you catch the video?
I did, and I thought it was a great concept. I think Snoop, we saw it with his videos with Michael Rappaport going at Trump. He's making some and some more serious ones too in recent times, and we covered a lot of them on AFH. And I think that Snoop continues to make music videos on a high level.
Yeah. Well, and really good news for you. your boy Logic. You know, you predicted this, but apparently he's not actually retired.
A rapper not actually retiring? No.
And that means that you're gonna get another Logic song on the playlist for
Man,
another
yeah.
year or so. But no, actually, he's got a he announced a joint project with Madlib, and it's going to be called MadGic, MadGic. Uh, what's the laughter for?
Nah, man, nah. You know what? You know what? They put the first song out, and I thought it sounded really good.
You liked it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's boom bap. Like, it's called Mars Only Part 3. You know, kind of stripped down. Logic's had a lot of instrumentation in the song over the years, and this one's more like, you know, just drums and like and rhymes. So you liked it?
I did. I did. You know, I've never denied Logic can rap. Sometimes his content loses me. I thought this one was good. It came out of nowhere. I mean, for me, I would never have guessed. I knew Logic was going to come back and pick up the mic, and he
Never
said,
said Logic made a good song. Is that what you're saying?
"Yo, man, I think I bought his first album, and I certainly, as I've said, I put Logic on Hip Hop DX in like 2011, 2012. So it's all love between me and Bobby. Sometimes I just eye roll at his moves."
Right. So you're welcoming this on the playlist?
Yeah, man, it knocks. You know what? And it needs variety. So I'm with it, man. And you liked it too?
I did like it. I don't think I liked it as much as you did, but I'm gonna give it a few more listens though. But yeah, I will say that I'm a huge Logic fan. You put him on DX, I put him on BT. You know, we both have had a hand in making his career, which is, you know, kind of cool. I don't know that either one of us anticipated he would blow up like he did.
Yeah.
Um, you know, but I've always thought he was talented since the young Sinatra days. I mean, I think the first joint that I heard was that I think it was called Yes. I can't remember. I think it was called
Yeah.
Yes Sinatra.
That
Where
was from me.
yeah, where well, no, this is before I even met you.
No, 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 no. But that was the first song I heard too that
Oh,
grabbed
for
me.
you
Yeah.
too. Yeah, the joint that the Keep It Real, the Milk Bone,
Yeah.
like the same one that
He's
Big.
rapping on the street, like, he's got some friends with him.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Big Al and Jay-Z rapped over that for their freestyle battle,
Mhm.
but he killed that. And so I've been a big fan since then, and obviously he's been in heavy rotation on our playlist because of that. And um, this one I got to listen to a few more times so I can just kind of catch it. But I'm really looking forward to the project. Madlib, you know, is undefeated in the last several years. Like
Mhm.
the stuff he's done with Freddie Gibbs has been amazing. I really liked his instrumental album they released last year. You know,
This year, I mean, it's early this year, and it stays in rotation for me
yeah,
too. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I think it'll be really cool to hear them because, to my knowledge, Logic is the rapper with the most commercial success that Madlib has collaborated with at
Hmm.
this stage in his career. I mean, can you think of anybody else?
Uh, yeah. I mean, Logic's gone number one. I mean, on an album to album level where it's full on collaboration, maybe not. I mean, he's worked with Erica and done some other things with really A-list artists. But like I said, of the youth movement right now, we knew that him and Mac Miller had started making stuff. It had a similar kind of jam their name together title. I a little bit eye roll at that, but Madlib's done that before. I think he's done that with Guilty Simpson and other folks years before this. But from what I've read from Egon and other people, we may never hear the Mac Miller stuff. So
Mm.
this is huge. And if it brings more people into the Madlib chamber, I'm with it. And like I said, and I like the single. I thought it was cool, and I need to listen some more times and see what else comes. But yeah.
Yeah. So anything else you want to cover?
I mean, just in quick bits, I want to say something I'm excited about. There's a D.O.C documentary reportedly in the works from the same producers of The Last Dance, which you and I adored. I mean, I think you on a very high level, given your fandom, and folks that also worked on the G-Funk documentary, which celebrated Warren G. And the D.O.C is a hip hop hero, and that doesn't get the attention. So whether it comes or not, that's just something on my radar. I've noticed a lot of our reporting over the D.O.C over the years is picking up right now. So I think folks are looking into Tracy Curry's story, and I hope it's told on a high level.
Mm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I also lived through that era, so know the D.O.C story really well. And you and I have documented it over the years too. A lot of people know what happened up until and through like his accident, tragic accident, which left his voice the way it is today. But a lot of people don't know just how critical a role he played in Dr. Dre's sound for years after that. Just as a writer, as A&R person, arguably, really just helping to map out the Chronic and other things. So I think having his story told, and the success that he has continued to have since the accident will be really cool to see. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
man. You
yeah.
heard any good music this week?
Yeah, man. After you told me about that Crisis album, this is just a couple of days ago. I dug into that deep and like put like 4 or 5 joints on the playlist, our AFH Spotify playlist, um, which I think are amazing. Got new songs from De La and Rhapsody and Busta Rhymes and Pharaoh.
Zell's got a scorcher on there too. I saw you put that on the
Yeah,
playlist.
Dell killed it. So, so my song of the week would be from that.
Okay.
I have The Return featuring Away Team, which is just unbelievable. I think that's fantastic. But yeah, I encourage everyone to check this project out. You were definitely right in recommending that. So that was great. But what about you?
And that's cool that that's the song too, because that's where Crisis came from. I mean, that whole Justice League, out of North Carolina, when Little Brother was blowing up, Crisis and Sean Boog were like the next up. And to see him go full circle and do that, I'm really happy for Crisis. My show stopping, and it's my song of the week, is Better You by Evidence. Evidence put out a song last year called The Unlearning, which I think spent close to 52 weeks on our playlist. Was just one of those COVID-19 inward introspective songs that just among my most played last year. And on Friday, he came with a new joint produced by Alchemist, Better You. Ev is very much still in this Mr. Slow Flow chamber. Um, and he said that whatever he did next would be a step apart from the Weatherman series, which this is, I think, but it definitely finds Ev at a vulnerable, reflective place. And he's naming the album The Unlearning. And that's coming June 15th with Rhymesayers, from Rhymesayers. And already Conway, Boldy James, Fly Anakin, who's on the playlist, as is Conway right now, and some other cats. So I'm really excited. I think, Ev, we've talked about it with Royce and Master Ace and some other people on this podcast. Evidence is somebody that continues to get better with time, and this new single is no exception.
Yeah, I found him to be one of the most consistent artists in hip hop, at least over the last several years. And quietly one of my favorite artists. Like, yeah, there's not a project that he's released in the last, 5 years or so where I haven't not only liked it but loved it. And he always has really interesting concepts, and he has one-liners that like just make you think for days. Like, he talks about dance around the meaning of life, but don't but never ask the question, like
Yeah.
what is it? Like, I mean, just he's just a really special artist, man. So like glad to have him have new material, and really excited to hear that he's got
And I never do it too, but I hit you last night, and I think you were gonna do it anyway. But I was like, yo, man, consider this one for the playlist. Nudge, nudge. And
yeah.
yeah, man. So the playlist is looking as great as it has in a while. There's a lot of new music on there. Marcus Precise and Mick Jenkins and Fly Anakin, and I don't know how to say this artist's name because I'm corny, but like Pink Stifu. I don't,
Yeah,
we got a lot of new heat on there. So I encourage everyone, hit. You can find it on our page on Facebook, or find it directly on Spotify. But there's some gems on there.
word. All right, man. Well, always a pleasure. I hope that the next several, actually, we can start off on a lighter note. But once again, rest in peace to Shock G. Long live DMX, Black Rob, and yo, be safe.
You, man. Likewise. Until we do it again.
All right, peace.
Peace.